In Conversations with the Artists Enlight the World, we're going to be hearing first from Maya Chaimovich, then from Lena Meszaros, and then from Ruby Horansky, and finally from Lena Meszaros. And I'm probably mispronouncing everybody's name, but they will tell you how to pronounce it properly when they come on screen. And the first person that we're going to hear from is Maya Chaimovich. Maya, if you would turn on your camera and your microphone, we're all set. There you are.
Okay, good evening to all of you. I'm Maya Chaimovich from Israel. In 1995, I was first exposed to the world of quilting, and quickly I drawn to the abstract realm in which I create today. Since then, I have participated in many group exhibitions and presented solo exhibitions in Israel and abroad. In my work, I use many types of materials, most of them from recycled clothes. Through the art quilt, I express my feelings and tell my own stories. And I share with you few of them. Photo number 1. This quilt in between, it's inspired by the Dead Sea in Israel. For years, my husband and I had to spend 1 month every year in the Dead Sea for health skin problem of my husband. I have a lot of time for my own, and I used to walk along the water, took many photos. The color of the sea, of the water, it is now, always. It is so beautiful, all kind of turquoise, sometimes dark blue, and the blocks of the salt, the white color, it's amazing. And the combination between all these colors of the sea and the desert and mountain around, it's so beautiful that this was the inspiration for this quilt. And now photo number 2, you can see the detail of this quilt. Here you can see better the way I quilted in spirals. I quilt in free motion machine, quilted, and I like this shape because it reminds me the shape in the water when you throw a stone, or if you cut a wood, or the topography map. And the most important, it's my fingerprint, which touch and create the quilt. Photo number 3 is birth certificate. This quilt is about my husband's father. He was born in Poland on 1910, and when he was 15 years old, he left his home for good. He traveled for years in Europe and then arrived to Israel. All his life, he did not tell anything about his family, but we knew that he had big family, and he was trying to find relative without any success. Years after he died, his sons, 3 sons, including my husband, they decided to try to find relative. Then it's a long story, but in the end, after long research through the internet, we decided to find big family. And one second cousin, even in Ramat Gan here, 10 minutes from our house, and another second cousin in Toronto, where my husband's brother is living, and even one first cousin in Boston. She's now 90 years old, and I was very close to her, visited her and spent some time with her. When we found this relative, we succeeded to receive the document from archive in Lodz, where he was born. I took the birth certificate of my husband's father and I made a silk screen from it, and I included here small pieces in my quilt. I added to it also letters in Hebrew, in other language, numbers, music notes, and this is the quilt first birth certificate. Then in photo number 4, you can see the detail. I always try to make connection between my quilt idea and the fabric I use. I want to express better the idea of to be more understanding. Then photo number 5 is Purple Orchid. This quilt is about our second daughter. Years ago, my daughter was very, very sick, and it was unusual sick, and we didn't know how to help her. Then after months of suffering, slowly we feel that she became a little recovering. Then I bought for her a purple orchid, which she liked very much. And always this quilt reminds me the beginning of her recovering. And now she's okay. Then in photo number 6, you can see the detail of this. Many people ask me if I'm drawing before I begin the new quilt. So I never make a drawing or any sketch. I have a general idea in my head and a passion to certain colors. And then I begin, and slowly, slowly the quilt created. And it's also for me a mystery what will be in the end. Then photo number 7, it's my quilt, Tender Grape. This quilt is about my daughter's name, the meaning of her name. It's her name in Hebrew is Smadar, which is the meaning of this name is the special smell that the small flower of the vines has before the grapes. Then in photo number 8, you can see the detail of this. I use in my quilt, most of the fabric which I use are recycled fabric. I took many clothes, sometimes shirts, sometimes skirt, sometimes trousers. I cut small pieces from it and I combine them to my own story. Then photo number 9 is Rust Forever. This quilt is about the place which I was born. I was born in kibbutz named Yad Mordechai, which is very close to the border. On the Independence War on 1948, I was 3 years old and the kibbutz was bombed, and also the water tank which supplied water to the kibbutz was bombed. After the war, the member from the kibbutz decided to put the water tank on a hill inside the kibbutz with the big hole which the bomb create. And through the holes, we can see the rusty object which were inside the tank. This rusty object, it became more and more rusty during the years. And this was the inspiration for my quilt. In this quilt, I dyed natural fabric with rust object, and I combine also the botanic eco print which I made. You can see that the colors are fade, and there is another inspiration, another effect of the quilt from my other quilts. Then in photo number 10, you can see the detail of this quilt. It's, as I say, it's different shade, very quiet, not abstract, not a contrast like usual my quilt. In quilt number 11, this is a miniature quilt, which I like to do also, especially during the last year, in the Corona year. I didn't have so much patience, and I make few small quilts. I didn't have patience for big quilts. And here I play with colors, with lines, and try to make it happier quilt. Then the last one is number 12, this quilt, A Tiny Moment of Happiness, which is the quilt from the Light the World exhibition. In this quilt, my inspiration was from fairy tale, which was written 175 years ago by Hans Christian Andersen, called The Little Match Girl. It is very sad story about very poor girl who tried to sell her matches in freezing dark night without success. And I try to express here the darkness and the small light of the matches. In quilt 13, you can see the details of it. I'm trying to say in this quilt that there are so many children in the world also now that even tiny moment of light is the whole world for them. And the number 14, it's thank you for joining me and listening to me. Here is my detail of my website, and you can see more photos and information about me. And thank you very much.
Thank you, Maya. Ruby, can you turn on your video and your microphone? Wonderful. Go ahead and start.
Okay, hi, I'm Ruby Horansky in Warminster, Pennsylvania, which is about an hour north of Philadelphia. And I'm privileged to be part of this beautiful show. So, can we have the first slide? Yes, this is Blaze, the quilt that got into the show. It's all pieced. I'm basically a machine quilter. A lot of the fabric in here is from recycled clothing. On the other hand, you can see that I'm in love with plaids, and there are new plaids in here. I will buy plaids. In other words, if I see something that really turns me on. I wanted to talk about the light in this quilt, because light is the theme of the show. It's also something that has interested me from early on. Next slide, please. This is one of my early quilts, and I had probably been quilting for a year or two. I didn't mention that I'm self-taught. I have a background in sewing and home sewing and painting. And I learned from books, basically, and magazine articles, how to quilt. So this shows you my early interest in light. Next slide, please. And then I became involved in watercolor quilts, and these are tiny little squares that change color. Anyhow, the light is there. Next slide. And here the light is coming from outside. The quilt seems to be a spotlight on it. Next, please. And this tiny little thing is 4x4. It was done as a donation for the Brush Gallery in Lowell, but I include it here because it's natural light. And next slide, please. And here there is a glow coming from around the center, and the light seems to be coming from the quilt itself. And next slide. Then I got involved in a series of transparency quilts. And here the illusion is that we're getting light from a light box, where the layers of the quilt are are layered on and you can see through toward the light. Next slide, please. This is more in that series. I went a long time with the transparency quilts because I was so involved and till the idea finally played itself out and I went to something new. Next slide, please. More transparency. This one, sorry, I didn't include any detailed shot. This is heavily embroidered because I didn't get the value I wanted. I kept adding thread and whatever I needed to get the light just right. Next, please. And this is, again, the transparency. Next, please. More of it. Next. And this is the last transparency that I will show you. Here, this was a project for the Brooklyn Quilt Guild when I lived in New York. They wanted a tribute to Henry Hudson, the anniversary, the 400th anniversary of his trip up the Hudson River. And so this is his boat, Half Moon. And what I do, I split it in half. So now you have half of it in one value and half in the other. I had fun. Anyhow, I had reached the end, I think, of my ideas dealing with transparency. And also, I was working in a graphics program on the computer where I would get the idea, work out the design for it, and then follow that sketch. And I felt too restricted by it. And one day I thought, what would happen if I just took fabric out of my stash and dealt with fabrics that seemed to like one another? So next slide, please. I got a very different effect and I felt very free. And so I was off on a new series. Next slide, please. And this is my second attempt to work with these fabrics. I had, it was a larger quilt and it was a disaster. If you recall what I said a few minutes ago, I had no idea of how I would finish. That red quilt that I showed you before was only 12 by 12, but this one I think is about 45 square. And it was a mess. There was no structure at all. And you didn't know where to look. So what I did was I threw half of it out and I took the pieces I really liked and cut them into blocks. So now I had a way to work. I could attach the blocks. Oh, this was so easy. I felt as though I had discovered a new continent. And so I stitched the blocks together and I was pleased with the result. Every one of the blocks, I remember, had to have certain colors and fabrics in it. So there was unity there and I was pleased. Next, please. But now that I work with blocks, I could see possibilities. And so I made syncopation, which is, it nods to my interest in jazz and music because the stripes don't meet they're offbeat and I like that. So next, please. Then I got interested in the sashing between the blocks. And so I had, I also want to point out that there is a glow behind the quilt, the light again, which interests me. So I had sashing, but I didn't like the idea of having it too straight and fixed. And so I made different widths and different colors, and this is the result. Next, please. So then I zoomed in on the blocks and I designed the sashing so it wouldn't be so regular. My plaids, you can see them in there. This is part of my stash. I fall in love with the fabric and then you'll see it over and over in my quilts. Sometimes if I have a fabric that's not being made anymore, I'll treasure it, and or a garment that I'm cutting and using pieces of. I'll use it to the end. I'll even stitch little tiny pieces together to get that into the quilt. Some of the stitching here is bobbin stitching. That is, it's pearl cotton on the quilting, and it's done from the other side to put a layer of red on there. Next, please. And this is called Photo Album. I have no idea when I start. These are purely abstract, but as I work on them, they suggest things. And for some reason, I could see in the plaid patches the faded photos in an album. Next, please. And so we're back to Blaze. And Blaze, Blaze started out with an idea. What if I allowed some of the sashing color to appear in the block and it wasn't so cut and dry? So it worked a little bit, but not a lot. You can see down right in the middle, about a third of the way up, you can see pieces of red floating in the white. And that was okay, except that when it was all over the whole quilt, it lost the idea of sashing or block, and it was just a royal mess. And it had not enough unity or structure for me to be pleased. So then I thought, well, why don't I just eliminate the sashing in parts of it and suggest it in the middle and just float out to the end and eliminate it. So I did that and I liked it. And it also started to look to me like the white heat that you get in a really hot blaze. And of course, I was listening to the news, and what did they have on? The California wildfires, how they were too hot for the firemen to go in and do anything with them. So that's the origin of Blaze, and it's approximately 45 by 45. A lot of them are, because that is the size of my dining room table. which is also a place where I cut and measure things. You can tell I'm not making a lot of big dinners these days. So thank you very much for giving me your attention, and I am so pleased to be part of the show.
Thank you, Ruby. Lena, you can turn on your camera and your microphone. Wonderful. And Ruby, can you turn off your camera?
It's okay, I can start.
Yes, please go ahead.
Okay, good evening. I am Lena Meszaros from France. I am Hungarian and Russian origin. I studied drama and literature in Budapest in Hungary. In the 90s, I arrived in France and I discovered patchwork. I was never interested in traditional motifs. At this time, it was just the beginning of contemporary quilts in France. As I didn't speak French, I changed the spoken language for the visual. I found a way to create personal, figurative scene. It was my only possibility to communicate with others. I especially love to tell stories with my creations. At the start of my career, I worked in a theater as a playwright, and since then, I have kept my liking for staging. I love the idea of suspending time, a snapshot, an instant when everything stops, but you can always imagine what was happening before and what will come after. I put the cursor in different places according to the emotion to be given. Visually, my artworks are also intense. There is often a Baroque luxury of details and abundance of colors and emotions. I stopped creating for 15 years for professional reasons. I still have a full-time work, but since 2016, I am back, and all that you see here is my work for the last 5 years. Let's start. I symbolically start my presentation with this quilt. In parallel with my work, I became a Qigong and meditation teacher, and this experience has profoundly changed my view of the world. I started meditating a few years ago. Like many people, I only had in mind the images you see on television. I thought that you just have to sit down, cross your legs, and life becomes zen. The reality is that when we settle down, we are assailed by sensations, images, emotions, thoughts. When we meditate, we face fears, anxieties, regrets of the past, physical pain, and the incessant chatter of the mind. Through time, I began to see images, compositions, colors on the border between dream and reality, sometimes bizarre or unusual, that we call internal landscapes. My quilts have found a spiritual connection. Next slide, please. This is a story about my relationship with my sewing machine, proud to be a machine for artists. But we are fighting. It breaks the thread, bends the needles, make weird noises. It resists my will. I want to do something, and it does not obey. In this dream, my machine suddenly comes to life and throws me. This time, sweetie, I'll show you what I am capable of. In an animal fury, he turns into a magnificent white dragon. He takes possession of the artwork, unfurls his wings, grabs me in his claws, and starts stitching me. I am not afraid. It's not a scary scene. He plays with me, but with an underlying mocking tone. He embroiders a pretty red heart on my inert body. I do not move. It's ambiguous, but I feel his love. In the end, we are driven by the same passion, the same desire to create. And so I only have to accept this adventure. Next slide, please. My family history is similar to Maya's. My ancestors were forced to be always on the move, to flee, to settle in foreign countries, change name and language, lost in the world. I discovered them little by little on social network. Sooner or later, we all have to position ourselves in front of our family and cultural heritage. In this work, the legacy is represented by a large coat made of odds and ends, a coat that passes through all eras, which carries the history of several generations. After having refused for a long time, I decided to carry my heritage coat, raise the collar, push the arms, accept. On the road, however, we realized that there is not our only suitcase to carry, but that we also drag the suitcases of others. People who did not have the opportunity and the chance to fulfill their life as they wished, and who place all their hope in us, to remember that their life, their knowledge, their experiences were not in vain and do not disappear. This acceptance and awareness also make it possible to understand, open, and release certain suitcases. Next slide, please. Tornado was my first lockdown quilt, and at the same time, an openness for new materials, such as plastic and paper. I started to explore acrylic pouring on transparent plastic sheets and integrating them into fabric. The idea of this quilt came on the last day before the first lockdown, when I hastily picked up my personal stuff before leaving my office. I knocked over the binding machine. Thousands of little pieces were scattered. Exasperated, I yelled, "What a disaster!" But then an idea was born, and I carefully collected all the pieces. These little pieces were glued to the fresh acrylic pouring on transparent plastic and copiously quilted. Tornado took on its full meaning during the confinement to bring out emotion and put in picture the violent epidemic that swept through our old life. Next slide, please. There was in my second presentation a detail about, but okay. So Dance of Death. This is also a COVID quilt. My last one just finished. You are the first people to see it. The theme, Dance of Death, was very popular in Europe in the Middle Age, especially during pandemics. But I made my personal interpretation to it. What happens if on a street corner we meet death? Seemingly, we attend a courteous scene, a request to dance. But I think, firstly, the girl refuses it because the skeleton has to stand on the skirt of the girl with its foot to retain her. So the situation is not very comfortable. But the girl looks him straight in the eye with astonishment, why me? And with a lot of dignity. I transferred a medieval street corner picture with Photoshop filters to create a weird background for this fortuitous meeting. And then I printed it out and arranged it in an unreal perspective. Next slide, please. This is my quilt selected for the exhibition Light the World, and its title is We Are All Lights. We live in an exploded, wounded world. We all have to watch helplessly our normality being shattered. There is no return to an old life. We have to build the new one. We cannot expect the world to change around us and to magically become more livable. It is obvious that we must seek change within us. The new world can only be built with a collective awareness, a strong understanding of interdependence that emerge from the ruins of the old one. In the light of this awareness, every individual in their respective place can move forward, enlightening the way. Next slide, please. I used different materials in this composition, acrylic pouring on plastic, paper, and some metal. We were in the second lockdown when I started to create it. I had no color printer at home to print out the faces, so I cut them out from old National Geographic magazines, and I modified them with a pen so that they could not be recognized. In addition, they are covered with plastic to form the bulb, and the base of the bulb is made of metal. Next slide, please. This is my working place, a little studio in the basement with garden view. You see here a quiet time between two projects. There is not so much place to create, so usually when I start a new art quilt, I invite the whole house. Next slide, please. It's the same studio under occupation. In summer, I can go out on the terrace to paint, and here is a little video about how I made the poured parts of my quilt. We are all lights. Next slide, please. My last slide is about my involvement with the regional SAQA group, Europe, Middle East. I proposed for our group to make the Orient Express project. Orient Express was a mythical train which started to circulate in 1883 and joined Paris to Constantinople first time. It was a luxury train with all the comforts one can have at home, whilst the landscapes of Europe scrolls behind the windows. A privileged transport of royal families, journalists, writers, filmmakers, diplomats, adventurers, and spies. For 90 years, a lot of new branch lines were created. The Orient Express is the symbol of a Europe that was created a long time ago, a dream to unite Occident and Orient. Participating artists will create an individual panel, a portrait format, with their inspiration related to the Orient Express. This can be a city, a landscape, country, a movie scene, decorative item, etc. The individual panels will consist of 3 portions. At the bottom part will be used unifying feature, train carriage image, wheels or locomotive. The top will be devoted to the sky, blue, gray, sunset, to unify the top sections. And the middle will be every artist's dedicated canvas. There are more than 60 people who joined the project, and we hope to be soon able to assemble several trains. And Maya is one of the travelers of Orient Express. Next slide, please.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you, Marta, for the opportunity to share my works, and Lucy for the infallible technical support. And thank you all for your attention.
Mm-hmm.
I turn out.
No, stay there. I have time for one question for each of you. Ruby, can you turn on your video and microphone again? While Ruby is doing that, Maya, one of the questions for you was, are you fusing the fabrics that you use? Are you using an iron to make them be on the background?
Yes, I understand. Many people ask me the same question. I don't use fusing, but I work on a base which is made from cotton. We call it flizoline with dots of glue.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason I use it, that I don't like the fusing is very stiff, it's very straight, and it sticks the whole piece. In this system, I put the small pieces overlap each other. So part of the piece is stay free.
Right.
It's rough edges, which I like very much, and it stay very soft.
Yes, they look soft.
I hope it's answered the question.
Yes, in Tiny Moment of Happiness,
Yes.
there are some lines of color. Were they on the fabric or
No.
did you sew them?
No, it's fabric. It's the fabric itself. The fabric is dark blue and it has this line. This was the design of this fabric.
They are
I never add something on above. I only use the fabrics.
very beautiful.
Thank you very much.
Ruby, here's your question because we are almost at the end of the hour. Why plaid fabric?
Ah, there are a bunch of reasons. I think the one that I learned a lot of what I learned from Ruth McDowell's books. She's a wonderful teacher, and she uses a lot of plaid. So one day I thought, what if the whole quilt was plaid?
Mhm.
And that was okay. But I think there's a deeper reason. I grew up with immigrant parents, and there was nothing to spend on fabric. If you were going to buy fabric and cut into it, you had to be either a millionaire or an idiot. But I could have somebody's old shirt. And now I find that I am hardwired that way, that if you give me fat plaid, I think, oh, I can play. But if you give me a solid color, I think, well, I better do something wonderful here. So I'm freer in the plaid. And I tried doing solids and I missed my babies.
That's wonderful. And I love your plaid. It's how I know it's your work. Lena, your one question is, how did you see your sewing machine as a dragon?
It was a dream. It was a dream. It's with the meditation, the images that comes sometimes. So I don't know, but
that's a good answer. Sometimes we don't know where our ideas come from. They just boom. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. It was fascinating to see the three different artists' approach to their work because they are each very different. If you will stay on, we're going to show this slideshow of the full exhibition again. If you would like more information about the exhibition, please go to SAQA.com. Look under art for the current exhibitions, and you can see all of the wonderful work. Light the World was planned long before the pandemic happened, but in the end, it could not have come at a better time because we all need to feel that sense of light after this difficult period that we've all been through. So stay on for the slideshow, and thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for the.
Thank you for the possibility.
Thank you for all of it.
Thank you. Thank you.